This chapter is all about getting Cubase to do the work for you. Now, two of your biggest helpers are automation and compression. We looked at each of these briefly in the quick start videos, but here we'll get in a little deeper. By the end of this chapter, you'll have a better understanding of the automation panel, automation editing, and how to get started using multiband compression. Gone are the good old days of gathering friends and relatives around the analog mixing board to do a mixdown. Now, Cubase can memorize almost any move you make. To review, automation uses the terms reading and writing. You engage write mode, begin playback, and move things. Then you turn off write mode, start playback, and the stuff moves. So far, so good. And of course, you can turn it all on or all off using the master switches at the top of the track list or the new switches at the top of the mixer. You can mute the automation on a track by clicking the little button with 3 bars on it. And by now you've figured out that you can open sublanes, pick out something that you want to automate, and draw in the data by hand. And when doing this, remember the line tool, and remember it has these other modes. It's perfect for this stuff. To automate a plugin, you can right-click on a control and select the automation lane for that control. Let's open the automation panel and work through it. Now, the buttons in the corner do the same thing as the buttons over the track list. The next button is the one with all the baffling terms, and the tooltip is almost no help here because all it says is global mode, which doesn't really tell you much. And none of us ran across the terms touch, latch, and crossover in music school, but there's nothing to it. These modes simply tell Cubase what to do when you stop recording automation. Do you want what you were just automating to stay put, to snap back, or to keep going? It would have been easier if they'd used the terms sit, come, and heal, because that's basically what they do. Now to set this up, I'm going to mute the audio so that we can just focus on the automation. And I'm also going to move the mixer over and strip it down so that you can see the fader in question. Now, you can't see the moves that I'm making on my control surface, so keep an eye on the track list. When that turns red, I'm moving the fader, and when there's no red, the automation is moving the fader. Okay, here's the weird part. There's no difference between these 3 different modes when you're writing your initial automation pass. I think this is why even those people who experiment with this often give up. So let's lay in some really basic automation to get started. Now, I'll go back over this with additional automation passes to fine-tune it, and this is when the modes come into play. So, here is my first very basic automation pass. Let's go back to the top and take a second pass. Now, if you select touch, the automation changes you make will last only as long as you're touching or moving the fader. As soon as I let go, it snaps back to the previous value. That's why nothing changes on the first pass. There's no baseline for it to snap back to. Use this mode for tweaking your first pass. But if you select latch, the automation changes will stick or latch in their last position. Use this mode if you're essentially overwriting. Crossover is a little weird. Crossover is a very specific type of fine-tuning. It overwrites until you re-intercept the first pass, and then it disengages and keeps going on its own until you touch the control again. And this will be easier to show you than to tell you. So let's get rid of that first pass. Now, I'll automate some long, slow volume changes. And again, whenever I'm writing data, you'll see the track turn red. Now let's back up and make a second pass in crossover mode. Now Cubase will start writing new data when I move the fader, and it keeps writing until I hit a value that rejoins that first pass. Then it automatically stops writing and goes back to what it was doing. Now let's look at how to edit what we've written. The most basic type of editing is trim. It's sort of like a volume control for the entire automation lane. So for this, let's pretend that the bizarre volume curve I just created is perfect, except that we want the whole thing just a little lower. Make another pass. And you can make adjustments without redrawing the curve. So if your volume changes are all good, but they all need to be just a little quieter, use this. If you want even more control, turn off the trim and select the area that you want to work on. Hover over the selection until you get a window frame like this, similar to what we saw in note expression. Hover over the smart spots until you see the tool appear, then click and drag. Now you can tilt the automation in and out, you can pull it up and down, or you can even compress it. If you want to do this to the entire track, select all first, but you'll have to scroll to the end to get to the last two smart spots. The rest of the panel is mostly on and off switches. You can pick what you want to see and if you want to suspend the read or write functions. This lets you turn off one type of automation project-wide. The fill function tells Cubase to take whatever you've automated and run that value to your stopping point. So if I turn on fill to start, then draw in a new value, Cubase extends that value all the way back to the start. You get the idea. Now I have two other tips for you. Call up your automation preferences with the gear panel. For whatever reason, this is the only way to get to them in Cubase. First, the display data on tracks feature is handy. It gives you a ghost image of the audio behind the automation. Second, if you're using a control surface like the CC121, try turning on Reveal. Then whenever you move something new on that control surface, the automation lane pops open on the screen. The return time window on the right lets you set how fast things snap back when you're in touch mode. So let's suspend all and put automation away for the moment so that we can take a brief look at multiband compression. I'll assume that by now you understand the basics of compression and EQ. If they're still a little fuzzy, run through the quick start videos again. Multiband compression is a fairly simple concept and a really handy tool. Now to keep the demo simple, I'll insert the compressor on this track, but in a mastering situation, you'd probably drop it in across the main bus. Now let me close up all the other stuff so that we can focus on this effect. The basic concept is that you can split your signal into 4 different bands and compress each one individually. This way you can, for example, compress the low end a bunch but leave the high end alone. Now, there are 2 basic sections to this device, the filter part on the top and the compressor part on the bottom. The first step is to set up your frequency ranges with these handles. You can start playback and solo each one to help you dial in exactly what you want. Okay, once you have that band focused, you can cut or boost the entire frequency range. And you can adjust the compression for it down here. And you can use the solo to check out the results, like this. Now you can also bypass each band as well. And if all you need is a really specific range, you may want to just bypass all of the other bands. Now, you can also choose from a whole bunch of professionally done presets to help you get started. Anytime you reach for a compressor, try a multiband too and see if it doesn't give you a little better precision. Now let's move on to the next chapter.